Everyone thinks they know when the Titan disaster happened, June 18th, 2023. The truth about what really happened only becomes clear when you talk to the people who saw the red flags from the beginning.
June 18th, 2023. The North Atlantic is cold and indifferent, roughly 640 kilometers off the coast of Newfoundland. Below the surface, the submersible Titan is descending through absolute darkness, bound for the wreck of the RMS Titanic at nearly 12,500 feet, or 3,800 meters down. At 9:45 a.m., approximately 1 hour and 45 minutes into the dive, contact is lost with the support vessel Polar Prince.
At 8 a.m. local time, the Titan submersible prepped to begin its descent. By 1:45 p.m., the Polar Prince officially lost all contact with the Titan sub and its crew.
The submersible and everyone inside were lost to the sea. But the fatal moment on June 18th, 2023 may not have truly begun that morning. A Titanic expert has revealed that the Titan's sub implosion was not an accident. It's worse than we imagined. This man saw it coming. Parks Stevenson is a former US Navy officer and a deep-sea specialist who has spent years studying the Titanic wreck site. Not from books, but from inside certified submersibles thousands of meters below the surface. He has personally descended to the Titanic multiple times. He understands what 12,500 feet, about 3,800 meters, of ocean really means. At that depth, pressure exceeds 5,500 pounds per square inch. That is roughly 400 times atmospheric pressure at sea level. It is crushing, absolute, merciless. In early 2018, Stevenson received an invitation. Ocean Gate leadership wanted him involved as their Titanic expert. The submersible at the center of the project was then called Cyclops II. It would later be renamed Titan. The pitch was bold: a new era of private deep-sea exploration, commercial missions to the Titanic, civilian access to the most famous shipwreck in history. Tickets were eventually priced at $250,000 per person. Stevenson took the invitation seriously, but when he examined the design of Cyclops II, something stopped him cold. The pressure hull, the very heart of any deep-sea submersible, was cylindrical, not spherical, and it was built from carbon fiber composite bonded to titanium end caps, dissimilar materials, unconventional geometry, experimental at depths where failure is instantaneous. For decades, deep submergence vehicles designed to reach extreme depths have relied on spherical pressure vessels. The reason is brutally simple. A sphere distributes external pressure evenly across its surface. No corners, no stress concentrations, no preferential weak points. Cylinders, by contrast, experience stress concentrations along their midsection and especially at the junctions where the cylinder meets end caps. Under immense compressive load, those transitions matter. Stevenson believed the design violated fundamental principles of pressure vessel physics. In the deep ocean, the force is not pulling outward, it is pushing inward, relentlessly. At 12,500 feet, the ocean has absolutely no mercy. Then there was the material choice. Carbon fiber is exceptionally strong in tension. That is why it performs beautifully in aerospace applications. At 30,000 feet, an aircraft cabin is pressurized from the inside. The fuselage is being pulled outward. Carbon fiber thrives under those tensile loads. But deep-sea submersibles face the opposite problem. The pressure is external. The hull is being compressed inward. Titanium and steel are traditionally favored for deep-sea pressure hulls because they perform predictably under compression and have long certification histories. Carbon fiber composites, especially layered laminates, can suffer from delamination or the microscopic separations between layers when subjected to cyclic loading. Every dive to depth and ascent back to the surface creates a pressure cycle. Stevenson saw enough to step away. He walked away from involvement well before Titan began commercial expeditions, and now we know that his concerns were not abstract. The dive everyone forgot. Everyone fixates on June 18th, 2023, the disappearance, the frantic search, the debris field found near the bow of the RMS Titanic, 12,500 feet beneath the North Atlantic. But if you rewind the clock to 2022, there is a dive that almost no one talks about now. Dive 80. This was the real beginning of the end. By 2022, OceanGate's Titan submersible had already completed dozens of descents. Each mission followed a similar arc: launch from the support vessel in the North Atlantic, descend roughly 3,800 meters, about 12,500 feet, toward Titanic's wreck site, spend hours surveying the debris field, then ascend. On paper, Dive 80 was another success. Titan reached the seabed. It saw Titanic. It came back up. But during ascent, something happened. There was a loud crack. At that depth, unusual sounds are never trivial. The ocean at 12,500 feet exerts approximately 5,500 pounds per square inch of external pressure. That is roughly 400 atmospheres pressing inward on every square inch of the hull. Later, when the US Coast Guard began reviewing Titan's operational history following the June 2023 implosion, investigators examined hull monitoring data from earlier dives. According to reporting and testimony, Dive 80 was flagged. The data revealed a significant acoustic anomaly, consistent with what engineers call delamination in carbon fiber composite. Delamination sounds technical, but the concept is brutally simple. Carbon fiber is not a single solid block of material. It is a layered composite. Sheets of carbon fibers embedded in a resin matrix, stacked and bonded together. Under compressive stress, especially cyclic compressive stress from repeated dives, those layers can begin to separate internally. The bond weakens. Tiny gaps form. You cannot necessarily see it from the outside, but inside the material, structural integrity is being compromised. Think of it like plywood under extreme load. The outer surface might appear intact, but if the layers start peeling apart internally, strength drops dramatically. In a deep-sea pressure hull, that drop is not gradual in its consequences. It is binary. Either it holds, or it catastrophically fails. Dive 80 reached Titanic depth and returned, but if delamination began during that dive, then the hull was no longer in the same condition it had been at the start. Carbon fiber does not heal once layers separate. It accumulates damage. And yet, operations continued. Titan would go on to complete additional missions after Dive 80. The fatal descent on June 18, 2023, was Dive 88. That means 8 more deep pressure cycles, 8 more descents to nearly 3,800 meters and back after the acoustic event that indicated significant structural change. At 12,500 feet, compressive force is not abstract. Imagine placing 5,500 pounds, which is more than 2.5 metric tons, on a single square inch. Now multiply that across the entire surface area of a submersible hull. The ocean is constantly trying to collapse the vessel inward to eliminate the air pocket inside. This is where geometry matters. Traditional deep submergence vehicles use spherical pressure hulls. A sphere distributes stress uniformly in all directions. There are no corners, no flat spans, no joints where forces concentrate disproportionately. That is why certified deep-sea subs, many constructed from titanium, rely on spherical designs. The shape itself is part of the strength. Titan was different. It used a cylindrical carbon fiber composite hull bonded to titanium end caps. Cylinders behave differently under external pressure. Stress tends to concentrate along the midsection and especially at the junctions where the cylinder meets the end caps. Those transitions can become focal points for structural weakness. Material choice amplified the risk. Carbon fiber excels in tensile strength. That is why it is widely used in aerospace, where internal cabin pressure pushes outward. Aircraft fuselages are resisting expansion. Carbon fiber thrives under that kind of load. But deep-sea vessels face the opposite problem. The load is external and compressive. The hull is being squeezed inward by thousands of pounds per square inch. There is also the issue of fatigue life. Carbon fiber composites subjected to repeated pressure cycles can develop microscopic cracks and internal separation over time. Stockton Rush publicly stated that OceanGate sourced carbon fiber at a discount from aerospace stock that was past its recommended shelf life. Composite materials rely heavily on the integrity of their resin matrix. Over time, especially if stored improperly or beyond certification windows, resins can degrade. They can become more brittle. Predicting long-term behavior under extreme cyclic compression becomes more uncertain. Unlike titanium spheres used in certified submersibles, carbon fiber composite pressure hulls at Titanic depths did not have decades of operational track record. There was no long historical dataset of repeated dives to 3,800 meters using that exact configuration. Some engineers reportedly ran advanced modeling that suggested buckling or instability under real-world conditions, especially after repeated pressure cycles. If Dive 80 marked the onset of significant delamination, then every subsequent descent was not just another mission. It was another stress test applied to a compromised structure. Microscopic damage does not remain static. Under 5,500 pounds per square inch, it grows. By the time Dive 88 began its descent on June 18, 2023, the ocean applied the same pressure it had applied during Dive 1, during Dive 40, during Dive 80. But the hull was not the same hull anymore. The implosion happened in milliseconds. The debris field was discovered near the Titanic's bow days later. Other warning signs and the implosion. Problems went beyond design. One of the clearest fault lines was certification. Titan did not undergo classification by major maritime bodies, such as the American Bureau of Shipping, or DNV. In the world of deep-sea engineering, classification is a rigorous, independent review process where vessel design, materials, manufacturing, and testing are scrutinized against established safety standards. It is slow. It is expensive. It is deliberately conservative. OceanGate chose a different path. CEO Stockton Rush argued publicly that innovation in extreme environments required stepping outside traditional frameworks. He described industry safety standards as overly restrictive and said they could stifle progress. In interviews, he framed Titan as a revolutionary platform, lighter, more cost-effective, and capable of bringing civilians to the wreck of the RMS Titanic for $250,000 per seat. Between 2021 and 2023, paying passengers joined expeditions launched from Newfoundland, roughly 400 miles offshore. But innovation without external verification creates a vacuum, and into that vacuum, concerns began to surface. As early as 2018, a former OceanGate employee filed a whistleblower complaint raising alarms about the carbon fiber hull's testing and inspection methods. The complaint alleged insufficient non-destructive evaluation of the composite structure and warned about potential catastrophic failure. The company disputed the claims and litigation followed. But the existence of internal safety disagreements was not a secret. Add the ingredients together. No formal classification by major maritime authorities, experimental carbon fiber composite at depths approaching 3,800 meters, a cylindrical hull bonded to titanium end caps, commercial passengers rather than military or research crews. It was a new model for deep ocean access, operating in international waters beyond the direct oversight of most national regulators. And then came the implosion. Implosion mechanics are not dramatic in the way Hollywood portrays them. They are faster. Once a breach occurs, the pressure differential between the inside, which is around 1 atmosphere, and the outside, which was around 400 atmospheres in this case, equalizes almost instantaneously.
The chilling new video in the Titan submersible implosion that killed 5 people on their way to the Titanic wreckage in 2023. It comes from a new docuseries shedding new light on the tragedy.
The surrounding water accelerates inward at extraordinary speed. Structural collapse propagates in milliseconds. Experts estimate that the full event likely occurred in tens of milliseconds, far shorter than the human brain's reaction time, which is roughly 150 to 300 milliseconds for simple stimuli. In other words, there was no prolonged countdown, no slow flooding, no extended awareness. The collapse would have been effectively instantaneous. Titan lost contact with its support vessel, Polar Prince, approximately 1 hour and 45 minutes into its descent. Days later, a remotely operated vehicle deployed as part of the multinational search effort located debris on the seabed near the Titanic's bow. The debris field recovered near the wreck of the RMS Titanic included sections of the pressure hull and structural components consistent with a catastrophic implosion. The world, which had spent 4 days calculating oxygen countdowns and clinging to the 96-hour survival window, was forced to confront a harder truth. Oxygen had become irrelevant the instant the hull failed. In the aftermath, the United States Coast Guard convened a Marine Board of Investigation, its highest level of marine casualty inquiry, a process typically reserved for major maritime disasters. Over the course of 2 years, investigators examined design decisions, material selection, structural health monitoring data, operational history, certification status, and internal communications within Ocean Gate. On August 5, 2025, the Coast Guard released its final report, describing the implosion as a preventable tragedy. The findings scrutinized the use of a carbon fiber composite cylindrical pressure hull bonded to titanium end caps, the lack of classification by established maritime certification bodies, and the continuation of dives despite earlier acoustic anomalies, consistent with structural degradation. One of the central questions examined was whether the chain of decisions remained within the bounds of calculated engineering risk or crossed into negligence. Maritime law draws a sharp distinction between an unavoidable accident and a preventable failure. That distinction carries consequences not only for historical judgment but for regulatory reform and potential civil liability. The Titanic disaster in 1912 led to sweeping reforms, including the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea. Lifeboat requirements were standardized, wireless communication protocols were strengthened, maritime safety evolved because tragedy exposed systemic weaknesses. In 2023, Titan's implosion raised similar questions about private deep-sea exploration operating beyond traditional oversight. Was Titan a bold attempt to democratize access to the deep ocean? Or was it a case study in what happens when innovation outruns verification? What is certain is physics. The debris now rests on the seabed near the Titanic, another testament to ambition meeting the limits of engineering. The warning signs were there. This was no accident. Ironically, the same can also be said of the Titanic. The Titanic parallel. History echoes. On April 15, 1912, at 2:20 a.m., the RMS Titanic slipped beneath the North Atlantic after striking an iceberg at approximately 11:40 p.m. the night before. In just 2 hours and 40 minutes, the largest moving object ever built by human hands at the time, 882 feet long, displacing more than 46,000 tons, was gone. Of the roughly 2,224 passengers and crew aboard, more than 1,500 died in waters hovering around 28 degrees Fahrenheit, or -2 degrees Celsius. Titanic had been described in promotional materials as practically unsinkable, a marvel of Edwardian engineering, divided into 16 watertight compartments designed to keep her afloat, even if several were flooded. But the iceberg tore open at least 5 compartments along her starboard side. The design assumptions failed under real-world conditions. It was not just ice that doomed the ship. Titanic carried lifeboats for only about 1,178 people, barely half of those on board, because maritime regulations at the time were based on outdated tonnage formulas, not passenger capacity. Wireless operators had received multiple ice warnings from nearby vessels on April 14th, including messages from the SS Californian and others, but passenger telegram traffic took priority, and not all warnings reached the bridge in actionable form. Speed was maintained at nearly 22 knots despite known ice fields. The disaster became a case study in layered overconfidence, faith in technology, faith in reputation, faith that the improbable would not occur. The consequences were immediate and global. Public outrage surged in Britain and the United States. Within 2 years, in 1914, nations convened to establish the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, or SOLAS. It mandated sufficient lifeboats for all on board. It required continuous 24-hour radio watches. It formalized emergency drills. The International Ice Patrol was created to monitor and report iceberg hazards in the North Atlantic shipping lanes. Naval architecture evolved. Bulkhead design improved. Redundancy became doctrine. Regulation hardened in response to catastrophe. More than a century later, the Titanic rests approximately 12,500 feet, or 3,800 meters, below the surface, roughly 400 nautical miles south of Newfoundland. At that depth, the pressure exceeds 5,500 pounds per square inch, over 400 times atmospheric pressure at sea level. It is an environment utterly hostile to human life, accessible only through specialized deep submergence vehicles engineered to withstand immense compressive forces. And in 2023, Titan was marketed as revolutionary access to that same wreck. Built by Ocean Gate, Titan promised private citizens a chance to descend to history itself for $250,000 per seat. The pitch was innovative: carbon fiber, real-time hull monitoring, breaking traditional certification models to accelerate exploration. The irony was difficult to ignore. A vessel traveling to observe one of the most famous examples of maritime overconfidence was itself presented as a bold challenge to conventional safeguards. The pitch was bold, the imagery cinematic, a private company opening the deep ocean to paying explorers.
By strategically creating and exploiting regulatory confusion and oversight challenges, OceanGate was ultimately able to operate Titan completely outside of the established deep-sea protocol. Avoiding regulation was the company's entire goal.
The irony now feels almost scripted. Having personally descended to the wreck multiple times in certified submersibles, Parks Stevenson has watched this parallel unfold with a historian's unease. He understands the Titanic not as myth, but as metallurgy, rivets, cold water, and cascading decisions. In 1912, shipbuilders trusted watertight compartments that did not extend high enough. Owners trusted speed in ice-laden waters. Passengers trusted the reputation. Stevenson has said he was surprised Titan lasted as many dives as it did. This was a technical assessment from someone who has trusted his life to deep submergence engineering standards built over decades. He declined involvement with the project years earlier because he believed elements of the design conflicted with established pressure vessel principles. The broader parallels stretch beyond the ocean. In 2021, commercial space tourism flights carried civilians beyond Earth's atmosphere. Experimental aviation startups test electric vertical takeoff aircraft. Autonomous vehicle developers deploy self-driving systems onto public roads. In each sector, innovators argue that legacy rules can stifle progress. In each sector, regulators struggle to balance encouragement with oversight. In 1912, the world learned that technological confidence without sufficient safeguards can be fatal. In 2023, the lesson resurfaced in a different form. History rarely repeats itself in identical form, but it echoes. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.